I've been getting a lot of clues. Apparently I had more adult sex partners before the age of 2 than most people ever have. And some of them were celebrities. So, in spite of being bald, I should consider that a compliment. I was probably bald then too. Didn't yet have enough hair. I always had a high forehead. But I think people admired my blonde hair and light-colored eyes, and they could imagine I was a little blonde girl. Their fantasy for a lot of men from around the world. The little blonde girl would have been the most rare. So they were fantasizing about that, apparently. I think I usually admire Africans from Africa more than African Americans because of the personality of African American. It's too competitive. But Emperor Charles in London, well, his father at the time was the emperor, and there's a regiment in Kenya that was called the King's African Rifles, a Kenyan regiment of riflemen who were officially under the command of Emperor Charles when I guess it was, Emperor Philip, or whoever was the emperor of the British Empire when Kenya was still under the British Empire. So they had the Kenyan regiment called the King's African Rifles. And so there's a lot of African Americans, such as men like Frederick Douglass. There were African Americans since the beginning who were loyal to the British, and there are African Americans now who are loyal to the British monarchy. And Kenya is a place where after the Suez Canal was created, the British could get to Kenya very quickly. So Kenya became closer with the British Empire after the Suez Canal was created, and West Africa became closer to the USA because of the waning influence of the British Empire and the rising power of the American nation. So the British became closer with Kenya after the Suez Canal was created, and I guess the Kenyan regiment of riflemen called the King's African Rifles were organized as a tribute to signal the friendship between Kenya and the British Empire. So the British have been the British Empire has been organizing multiple campaigns, social campaigns, to vilify me, and they punish those who had been my partners before the age of 2, who I couldn't even remember. The British Empire punishes them severely with deprival and ridicule and stalking, so that they will be persuaded to turn hostile against me, because it was considered to be too much consolidating of power, alleged influence, not power. I never had power. Influence. Too much consolidating influence into one individual's control to have so many adult partners he had been intimate with before the age of 2. So they said he's getting too much power, so they were starving me, and they were starving my former partners. And some of them were Mexicans, some of them were Chinese, apparently, these are the clues, and some of them were African Americans, and at least one from Africa. So the British were starving us, and the British were enlisting Church of England American congregations from the Church of England heritage. And they were enlisting those Christian congregations and also some Church of England congregations in Jamaica to denounce me and to preach sermons against me as if I had been possessed by demons. So that was the campaign of the British Empire against me as an individual. I never thought that was plausible until they informed me with clues of how many partners I had had before the age of 2. A lot. So anyway, that's interesting to understand something about the British Empire, the way the British Intelligence Agency works through America's Baptist and especially evangelical congregations who are of the Church of England heritage. So these congregations are working for Emperor Charles here in America, and they were working for his father, Emperor Philip, before him. And the way I defended myself before I even knew, this is how I got to be informed, is by beating them with my perception of international relations. And what I said was, as a historian, an amateur historian, I said there was never any racial slavery of Africans. And that was a blow for the British, who used that against the USA. And I beat the British at the understanding history. And they had forgotten some of their own history, such as this. There's never been any Irish language, so there's never been any Irish people. The Irish have always been English. And I'm the one who pointed that out after looking for a while at what they said was the language of Ireland, that it was no such thing. It was actually my pondering on carpentry, ship carpentry, and the history of Europe according to the timeline of carpentry and iron tools. When iron tools, the history of metal forging and the history of carpentry and iron tools. The evidence of carpentry is when the ships cross the ocean, you know that they have reached a certain level of carpentry, when the ships are seaworthy enough to cross the ocean. So that's how you know carpentry had reached that level, is by the arrival of ships from Europe to America, or the arrival of ships from Europe to South Africa and Australia. That's how you know the timeline. You can estimate the timeline of how advanced carpentry was by those events of history. And so that's also how I made the timeline for the settlements in Britain, because the English Channel from Calais, France to Dover, England was not crossable until you had a seaworthy vessel, until you had a proper ship, a sailing ship. And those had to be developed by trial and error, learning to sail in the Mediterranean, where you had less risk of getting lost at sea. You'd always land on the shore of some place that was known on the map. If you got lost in the Mediterranean and found yourself drifting ashore somewhere else, you'd be in Libya or Algeria or Cyprus or Palestine. So anyway, the British actually exaggerated their history, and they said that their history was much older. So I told things that about the British that the British didn't know themselves. Roman Britain actually was Spanish Britain. The Spanish were there first. Anyway, so yeah, and then there was no racial slavery of Africans, and my sociological proof, this is the sociological thesis of the century, it's that slavery is always male gender slavery, never racially, never exclusive to one race. It's always exclusive to the male gender. Women are above slavery, and men have to be vigilant to maintain their freedom, or to attain their freedom for the first time. So I defeated the Abraham Lincoln Republican narrative, which was a British narrative, and there was no racial slavery of Africans. And I put the British on the back foot by revealing that there had never been any racial slavery. So then they said they had their one of their new leader of the King's African Rifles is Barack Obama, who works for the British Empire, and and he's like the successor of Frederick Douglass. And there's been men after Frederick Douglass and before Barack Obama, but Barack Obama is the leader of the Africans of the British Empire. Serving Africans who serve the British Empire, Barack Obama is their leader. Then they said Barack Obama was armed with another historical narrative against 1776. And the New York Times had a narrative against 1776. The New York Times had their narrative that they called 1619, the year 1619, before 1776, reminding Americans that the history didn't begin in 1776. That's a good point. However, they're wrongly accusing the USA of racial slavery. The New York Times 1619 project is a historical slandering of the USA. So I defended 1776. Then they said, what about Native Americans? And then I figured this out after that. There was no racial slavery of Africans, there was also never anybody who is a Native American. Nobody has ever been a Native American because everybody arrived more or less at the same time, within the same century. Each race arrived within the same century. The Spanish brought Pacific Asians from the Philippines archipelago, so I call them Manila Pacific Asians, and they're a mixture of Chinese, African, and Spanish. That's what I call a Manila Pacific Asian. And there are different blends of Manila Pacific Asian. Some are more Spanish, some are more Asian, and some are more African. But they're all Latin Catholic types, except for the ones who came to North America and mixed with English and French, and those ones are called Cherokees. I defeated another of the narratives of that's the Roman Empire. The Spanish Empire is the Roman Empire. Spain and Italy used to be connected until French nationalism bisected Spain and Italy. Rome and Madrid are the two heads of, one is for the religious, the Pope, the religion, and the other is for this Roman imperialism, which is Spanish imperialism, and the imperial holdings are Latin America. So the not the Cuban Empire, I meant to say the Spanish Empire is actually the Roman Empire, and the emperor of the Roman Empire is the King of Spain in Madrid, and that's King Felipe. It's interesting that he has the same name as the father of Emperor Charles in London. They called him Prince Philip. So there never was any Native Americans, and the Spanish brought them here, and the Spanish helped them to be successful and come to a new place where they could be more prosperous in terms of agriculture and multiply. So the Spanish did the opposite of eradicating Native Americans. They weren't Native Americans, but the Spanish helped them to multiply by bringing them here and living with them here. So I defeated the British narrative and I defeated the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire narrative. I defeated these historical narratives only as a matter of self-defense. And now that is a good way to defend myself against the British, who used a campaign of hostility, social hostility, to deprive me during my childhood. I was deprived of enough food to eat for many years, and I think they did that to some of the African or Mexican or Chinese who had been my partners when I was young. Anyway, this is a video. I'm not sure if I'm going to post it. Maybe I'll post it. It's difficult for people to talk about, but here's the fact of the matter. Uncircumcised culture is different from circumcised culture. And people from the circumcised culture, they gasp when they hear about a man having sex with a baby. They gasp and they go, oh my gosh, did the baby live? Did the baby survive? And that's the circumcised culture. And that's different from the natural state of the human organism, which is the uncircumcised culture, where the uncircumcised father begins to have sex with his own children because he doesn't have premeditated planning involved. He doesn't have to carry around lubricant. It's just if he gets aroused by his daughter, and his daughter's younger than maybe she's 18 months old, he gets aroused by his daughter, and he doesn't have any lubricant, but he wants to see if he can fit his pecker into her. Maybe he starts with her pussy, and he's got an uncircumcised penis, and then it self-lubricates, and maybe it just pops right in. Maybe it pops right in, and maybe she cries for 30 seconds. Who knows? And then he does it again the next day, maybe. But then he after he gets sexually active with his daughter, then he has to do it with his son because his son feels left out. So then his son, who is either her older brother or her younger brother, feels left out of the father-daughter affair. So then he realizes that there's only one way to stop his son from crying and moaning. It's to do the same thing that he just did with his daughter the week before, or a few weeks before, or a month before, and then he does it with his son. That's uncircumcised culture, and that's happening before probably sometimes at around 18 months, maybe more often at 20 or 24 months. That's uncircumcised culture. But that's just the nature of the human organism as I understand it as an anthropologist, looking at what they are telling me occurred with me before I was 2 years old, a lot of adult male partners. Anyway, that's all for now.